So when you got an older British car that has one of these shifters that once you take the cap and everything off, it won't pull out of there, what do? Well, I'm going to show you today. So this is the engine and transmission from that Healy 3000 that I just pulled. And when I was taking the shifter out, I thought to myself, this would be a great video because I've had questions about this and even had one viewer request a video on doing this. So I put the shifter back in so that I could do a video on it for you. Now, this one, obviously, it just doesn't pull out. Now, when I went to pull this out, none of this cap and spring was even in there. So I got another one here that I got out of my spares pile. This is what the cap and everything looks like. So this would go on here and be pushed down, and then you got the snap ring. It goes in and it holds it all in place. The hardest part about all of this is really putting this cap back on, because sometimes that spring tension, especially if you got a new spring, is pretty tight there, and it can be hard to hold that down and put this in there at the same time. So a lot of times it takes a second person to hold it down while putting the snap ring in, unless you got a lot of hand strength. The reason this won't pull out is because you got these little pins right here on both sides that are driven in there that are capturing it in place. Now, even later cars have this, but the shifters will pull out on the later cars, and I'll show you the difference in the shifters once this is out as to why the early ones don't come out. And when I mean early, it's basically like, say, 60, 62 and earlier stuff will be more like this. But I'm going to show you how to take it out here with just stuff you have that most everyone has laying around their shop. Most people are going to have a bunch of hex keys laying around, right? And most people are going to have a hammer and small screwdrivers. So what you do, find you a hex key that'll slip in here, that'll slip in here, be relatively snug, right? And then take a small screwdriver and get it in behind there. And then just tap. And what's that doing is it's acting as a wedge, driving that pin out. And then you can kind of push the shifter over. And then just keep working it like that until it comes all the way out on both sides. And that will get the shifter out. Now on this side here, when I drove the pin back in, it actually went in a little further than it originally was, and now this won't fit in there. So we're going to show you another method here. You take two small screwdrivers, drive the one in and then the other. And then that'll make you enough room to go ahead and get this in there. Should at least. Not quite yet. And pull that over. That'll make you enough room now that you can get this in there. And do it again. And then pulling that shifter over, we'll drive that pin out. Now we got the shifter out. It's really that easy once you stop and think about it. So now I'm going to show you why this won't come out and this one won't. See, the slot on this is machined all the way through. The slot on this one isn't. So then these pins completely capture this in where you can't get it out. So yeah, that's why the early ones don't come out. So later on, they started just machining them all the way through to make it easier to service. Pretty much all these shifters have these little bushings on the bottom here, and that slots into the shift rod down there. And without that, you'll get a lot of rattling within the shifter. And also, the spring here also does help with the rattling as well, because it puts pressure straight down on that, keeping it from rattling, and also helps it to just kind of center and go straight up and down naturally, so you always find the center point to work from. And the spring is always oriented with the smaller portion against the shifter ball and the bigger portion up in the cap. When you go to put these back in, do not forget to lubricate all this with a little bit of grease and this and the ball and all that, to make it all work a whole lot nicer. And with the grease on it, that'll help kind of hold this in place and not flop around so much, so that you can get it to line up into that slot, because that has to be straight up and down and goes straight down in. If not, if that gets crooked at all, it won't go in. And if you just kind of pop it in place, you'll either break this plastic, or in the case of, like, say, the MGBs, you'll end up just popping that thing straight through and it'll end up on the ground and you have a big shifter rattle. So now I'm going to show you the difference between having this in place and not having it in place. And this applies to many, many cars. Put that in there, see how much it moves? And that'll rattle on you while you're driving. But if you have this actually in place, and this can be fun to get this thing to line up, but once you get it to line up, which I didn't get that quite right, there you go. Never force it in place, you can just rattle a bit. Now see how much less it moves? That is the difference between having that bushing and not having it in place.